Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Rambo First Blood, the board game, from designer Chris Batarlis and publisher Everything Epic Games. First Blood is a story-driven solo adventure game based on the events of the First Blood movie starring Sylvester Stallone. So let's head over to the table. I'll give you a general overview on how the game is played. Then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, before I show you the setup for First Blood, the board game, I just wanted to point out that this is the mission book. This is going to be kind of the main component that you're going to use as your kind of game board, and it's going to give you the layout for what you need for each individual scenario. And there's also, I just wanted to kind of show you that the story element to it, it kind of goes through the story of First Blood. And so oftentimes you're going to be reading and you're going to have some options, and depending on what option you choose, you'll have kind of a branching path and it might lead you to a particular mission. All right, so let's say for example that a choice I'd made sent me here to the booking and processing. So I'm going to show this one set up and then I'll go into a little bit more on how the game plays. Okay, so let's say through a series of choices I made, I ended up on mission 2, which is booking and processing. So the main area that I'm focused on is right over here. This is the map setup, and it's got also the enemy track here. There's a story element where you kind of read what's happening within the story. It gives you an idea of what you do for setup. So in this case, if I had any wounds on a particular stance, I could heal one of them, but I don't in this case. And I draw one tactics card. This is my tactics deck. It's been shuffled. I would draw one, and it turns out that I drew the field medicine card, so I can suffer 2 damage to remove one of my wounds. All right, and my damage track is right up here. So I've got that tactic card in my in my area here that I could use when I want to. They give me some special rules saying that there's no line of sight between these 2 floors because obviously one's on the first floor and I'm on the second floor here. Okay, it says you don't have any gear cards equipped. Got a couple of mission objectives. Only need one of which to be successful. I either defeat all enemies, and in this case I've got 3 junior deputies and Deputy Galt, or I could get my knife and reach the exit. And these are based on these point of interest. So right now Rambo is here. He's starting next to point of interest 1, which is his knife. So if I can get that knife, get over to POI 2, which is a door or a stairway to here, that's the exit. So 2 ways of winning this particular mission. I can kill all enemies or defeat all enemies, or get his knife, get over here to this stairwell and get to the exit. All right, and I have to do all that before the timer runs out here. Okay, so that's basically how you set the game up. Now, every round is going to have 5 different steps, and the first thing you do is activate your enemies, and that is done by looking at these enemy cards. All right, so right now on my floor I've only got these 3 junior deputies, and so these are the ones I'm going to have to be dealing with. They give you an idea of their range. In this case they have to be adjacent, how many people or targets they can have, which is 1, how much damage they do, how much they can move, how much they kind of resist damage, and how much health they have. And it tells you what their activation behaviors are. So in this case, the first thing they would do is move towards Rambo if they weren't next to him, which they already are, and then attack Rambo. All right, now, they're all adjacent to him right off. So you're definitely getting First Blood happening because they are going to do 3 attacks on me, each one of them doing 2. So you see my tracker up here takes 5 hits of damage. So if I have 6 hits of damage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as soon as 5 damage is done to Rambo, you have to take a wounded marker. He becomes wounded, and you have to cover up one of these stances. And these are the ways that Rambo can move, react, do actions. So let's say, for example, I covered up his recovery. That means that I can't use that stance until it's healed. So that was 5 hits and then one more hit still to come, okay? So right off the bat, I was hit with 6. So then if I had had any cards, any tactic cards that had a persistent icon, I would clear those off, but I don't. Now I choose a stance. And so I'm basically picking what I want to do. Do I want to take more actions and then move? Do I want to get Valor tokens, which Valor tokens can do a number of things. They can either help you gain more resistance to attacks, they can add to your attacks, things along those lines. They give you different benefits that you can have. Do I want to get some armor here that basically allows you to take some hits without getting actual markers on you? So let's just say, for example, I want to do this on the run, okay? Which means that in any order, you can get an armor token, which you'd put right here, all right? Then you can move 3 or do an action. Well, one action I can do is to interact with this point of interest, all right? Which I'm adjacent to it. So in this case, the POI 1 is getting the acquire Rambo's knife and remove this point of interest. So I use that one action, I remove that point of interest, and now I've got access to Rambo's knife, which I can use as an attack. When I'm adjacent to a target, one target, I can do 3 damage, and when I'm hidden, this weapon deals 2 damage instead of 1. Well, I'm not hidden right now, but I have access now to his knife. And I can also move 3, so maybe I can start moving towards that stairwell. 1, 2, 3, all right? So I've done my movement and my actions, and then I advance the round marker here, okay? So it moves from round 1 to round 2. Now, my mission failure tells me I have 4 wounds or objectives are not completed at the end of round 7. So I've right now got one wound and I'm in round 2. It will just continue like this. They're going to take their actions. They're going to move towards me. They're going to do their damage to me. I'm going to try to maybe now use my knife to fend them off, or try to move and get to the stairwell and try to get out of there before I get completely defeated by getting more and more wounds. And that's how this particular mission is going to go. And that's generally speaking how other missions are going to go. There are other ones that might give you items that you might find, like a lighter or rocks, and you might get that hidden status that I mentioned before. There are going to be potentially spawn points in other missions where enemies could come maybe at the end of the round. There's a lot more gear. Well, not a lot. There's a bit more gear you can get that can potentially add to your abilities to do things. You also are going to get potentially more tactics that will allow you to manipulate the board and things along those lines. All right, well, that's a general overview of how the game goes. I don't want to show you a lot of the book because I don't want to spoil things, although if you've seen First Blood, then not much of it would be a spoiler. But in case you haven't, that's all I'm going to show you here. Let's head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts. All right, so hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how Rambo First Blood, the board game, plays out. That particular mission is pretty indicative of how most of the missions are going to play out. Obviously, there'll be some changes and twists depending on the particular scenario, but that gives you a general overview of how the game goes. So, first thing I like to do is talk about some solo benchmarks, things I use to assess whether a solo game is something that I'm going to get off the shelf or not. First thing is win-loss conditions. Is there a clear win-loss condition? Beat your high score variant, that type of thing. Well, this is clearly a win-loss condition in each of these missions. And the way it works is that you're really playing through a story. And so there may oftentimes be a case where you fail a mission objective. And what you can do is you can start back from the beginning again and try to do the whole thing in one go, or you could just kind of restart from that mission and continue through the story. So that's fine for the purposes of this type of game. That makes sense. It's really the only way to kind of handle this. The other thing I like to talk about is setup and teardown. And honestly, I expected there to be a bit more to the setup and teardown. It goes relatively quickly, and I'm going to talk about why when I get to my solo experience portion of the review. But it's not long to set up. You can pretty much go quickly from one mission to the next. There's not a whole lot to manage or keep track of, so that's actually a good thing. The rules were generally clear. I felt like I relatively well understood how the game was played. It's a relatively simple rule set. There's not a whole lot of ambiguity there. I think they did a fine job of explaining line of sight, unpassable terrain, and things along those lines. But there's not a whole lot to it. It's a pretty simple system, and I thought that the rules were fine. There were a couple of little organizational things I think maybe could have been handled better as far as when something was introduced in the rules. There were a few little errors in spelling, some errata and things along those lines, but nothing too out of the realm. Okay, the other thing I like to do is talk about art and components. And this is a situation where I felt like the general look of the game was not terribly attractive to my eyes. Oftentimes they used movie stills, and that's fine. I mean, that's kind of almost standard when it comes to IP-driven games. It's not out of the realm to see movie stills. But other than those, I felt like the general graphic design of the game was not terribly attractive. It was functional, I suppose. It wasn't like the iconography was confusing, but there was just something like this gunshot card, where it tells you critical hit, take 1 wound. This is not a very attractive card. I feel like there could have been maybe some more art, something to kind of draw the eye, to make you feel immersed, because this is a story-driven game, and being immersed into the theme, I think, is crucial. And I think some of the graphic design of the game takes you out of that immersion. Also, I felt like the cardboard tokens were kind of cheap and uninspiring, not terribly attractive again. Nothing that really stood out and made you think that time and care were put into them. It just kind of looked cheap. I don't know how to put it other than that. And also, the miniatures did not feel of high quality either. They really kind of reminded me of little army men that you got as kids, you know, a whole bucket full of army men for $5. They just don't have a lot of detail. They're very small. Now I understand maybe they needed to be small to be put on the map book, but that just didn't really strike me as being terribly exciting. In general, I felt like the component quality was subpar. The art was subpar as well and uninspiring. So for the overall solo experience, now this is a difficult one because I really like First Blood. Particularly this movie. Some of the later Rambo movies I thought kind of went, you know, overboard and became almost cartoonish, and that's fine. I mean, that was probably what they were going for. But the First Blood movie was is one that I have quite a bit of affection for, so I was looking forward to playing this, and especially when I see this box. Right, this is a big box, and it says, you know, an epic game, basically, an epic experience. And so when I looked at what was actually inside the box, I was pretty taken aback, because really this is it. You've got this bit of tokens, these 4 little minis, this very small deck of cards, your player board, mission book, rule book, gigantic cardboard knife. Now, there's a lot of empty space in this box. Everything fits right there, basically. The book's on top. I think I was expecting more from this. I think I was expecting a game that had a bit more of this epic feel, and it just isn't there. It's very, very component light. And while that's not necessarily bad, in this game, it feels like there's something missing. Almost by its nature, where you're playing through the story, once you've played through it, which doesn't necessarily take very long, I don't know that there's a lot of replay value. I don't know that there's any replay value. I don't find myself, after going through it, feeling like I ever need to go back. Sure, you could make some different choices, but for the most part, you're going to end up in the same place. There's really not a lot of sense of discovery here. Once you've kind of gone through the campaign, which again is not very long, I don't know there's anything to bring you back. Also, I felt like oftentimes the win-loss felt pretty arbitrary to me, because it seemed so often that it was as a result of which tactic cards I was able to get out at any given time. And if I was lucky enough to get a tactic card that allowed me to move further, and my objective was to move far, that meant that I was likely to be successful in the scenario. And so that didn't give me a sense of, I didn't feel like there was a lot of agency. The enemies are going to come at you, they're going to hit you, and depending on what tactics cards you got, you might be successful, you might not be. And so that just kind of, again, takes away from this epic feeling that I think they were going for. It just so often felt like your win or loss was dependent upon cards that were very situational, okay? Overall, it feels like there were some corners that were cut throughout the process. I do appreciate what they were going for. I do appreciate that to some extent you feel like you're playing through the role of John Rambo, going through the First Blood board game, or going through the First Blood film in a board game fashion. But every step of the way, something felt either like a corner was cut or there was something missing. Something was just not there. For all of these reasons, I'm going to be giving First Blood, the board game, a 4 out of 10. It's not one I could recommend as a solo game. It just doesn't feel like there's enough there. Thank you so much for your time as always, and have a great day.